Well, hello, Life Church. There's some of you I don't know, but a lot of you I do know. And as always, the lights are blinding, so I can't see your faces, but I can see the outlines, and I'm sure it's good to see all of you. We're so glad to be back here. We've been here for a little over a week. We're trying to make it back here every now and then to be able to keep in touch with everybody, see family and friends, and see you guys. But when we made the plans to come over here, Pastor Rick, my dad, asked me if I'd like to speak, and I said, heck yes. Because, man, I have a lot of stuff to talk about. It's been a doozy of a year. And so, as a result, I have all kinds of fun things I can talk about. But, I was here last week. And Pastor Rick, my dad, told me that you guys were in a series called Crazy Faith. How many of you guys have been sitting in for at least one of those? I've really, really enjoyed the sermon last week because, how important is it in a faith that believes in a living God to talk about things like miracles and God intervening and coming down in our presence, in our midst, and doing incredible things that we could never hope to accomplish. That's extremely important to talk about that kind of faith and living with the full belief and trust that God is there like that, right? So it's a good thing, and I'm glad you guys have been talking about it because it's extremely important. So here's what I get to do. I get to come and bring you guys a message that is right in line with the topic of crazy faith, but it's not going to be as fun as talking about miracles and healings and God intervening in incredible ways. Because God does that, and I think probably most of us have seen God do that in other people's lives or have seen it happen in our lives. I've seen it happen in my life in incredible ways. But what I'm going to do, this is going to be a little more difficult. This is your warning going into this. What do you do when you have the crazy faith and you're trusting God, and you're not running from Him, you're living your life for Him, and you're following Him, and you're laying down things for Him, and He absolutely does not cooperate with you? What do you do? And so, in other words, crazy faith is, obviously, that's Christianity, right? Crazy faith. But what happens when the crazy faith does not yield the crazy results? Is our crazy faith going to be conditional upon getting the answer we want? That's what we're going to talk about today, so already you can tell you're like, oh great, this is going to be really fun. Here comes the guest speaker coming to beat us over the head with a downer message. But that's my disclaimer, because it's not as feel-good a message as maybe talking about miracles and healings, because those things are obviously, again, they're true and they're real and they're good. This is a balance to that point, but I think it's important, because I think a lot of us in this room are sitting in a place where we're asking God for something, and we're following Him, and we're trusting Him, and we're asking Him again and again and again, and He's just not seeming to cooperate. So what do we do? And I really believe that the stuff we're going to talk about today can help us create a foundation to be able to learn how to lean on God even when He doesn't seem to be giving us what we want. Even when He never gives us what we want, but how to have a faith that is not based on the condition of getting what we're asking for, but is based on the goodness of God and nothing else. Amen. So that's what I think we're going to spend most of our time on. But first, since everything else is going to be heavy, let's do something slightly light to start off with. We don't want to have too much of a downer, right? How many of you guys have ever prayed for something small? Just something like comparatively unimportant compared to like the really big things? Anybody? Something that, like, thinking about it, you're like, I don't know if I should have bothered God with that one. Okay, raise your hands. Don't be ashamed. You guys can all, every head bowed, every eye closed. Raise your hands if you've ever prayed that God would help your favorite sports team win. To my eternal shame, I have cried out for divine intervention for the Miami Dolphins because God knows they need it. But this is small things, right? It's silly things. You're like, let me bother the creator of the universe with this one. I've definitely before been in the car with my kids, driving around, looking for a place to park at like a mall or a store or something, and thrown out a, Lord, please let me get a good parking spot. I don't want to walk in the sun with these perfect little rugrat and hellions trailing behind me. But small stuff like that, right? That's comparatively small stuff. How many of you guys have ever prayed for something small and then I actually felt like God gave it to you? You're like, oh, thanks. It's not exactly a faith booster, but it's nice. Thanks for the gesture, Lord. Yeah, some people would say, okay, well, that's a coincidence, and if there is a God, then he doesn't care about tiny things like that. But I would say, I think that God is involved enough in our lives to actually be willing to respond to small stuff like that. That's my view of God. I think he's involved in our lives, and not in a general, vague sense, but intimately. And sometimes he knows that little tiny thing can give you the boost you need to make it through the day, or just a little bit of encouragement. And I think he can and does respond. And so that's good, right? We're talking about crazy faith and jumping out on a limb and trusting God for the crazy stuff. Last week we were talking about healings and miracles. Good stuff, and God does this stuff. It's all throughout the Bible, all kinds of accounts through history and revivals. God does this stuff. Now, unfortunately, this message is not about how to trust God with the little things too, because there's big things that are also a problem. The reason why I care about this, and most of you guys know why I care about this, is because my wife, my children, my family, we are, I'd love to say coming out of, but I'm going to say in the middle of, the most difficult period of our lives. We were, just to give you guys a bit of a backstory, most of you guys know this, but I worked with this church for 3 years as a teaching pastor, and God put us through a really difficult time where I was working multiple jobs to make ends meet, and it was really difficult for the family. But God called us out of that and called us to move back to Texas, pack our whole family up, and begin teaching with this Bible school. God opened this opportunity and called us out there. So this is a period of our lives where God had brought us to our knees, and we were seeking him like never before. I was closer than him to him than I had ever been before. I was following him with everything within me. And it was like the best we'd ever done as a family. And we're like, okay, you know what? We made it through the trial. And now God is going to bring us to Texas, and we prayed, Lord, give us a time of resting by green pastures and lying by still waters. Please make that this next season, because our family's been through a year and a half of very difficult time. And most of you know this, but 1 year ago, this last Friday, 1 week before we were going to be flying out to Texas, we had packed up our entire home. We were in the process. I was running errands with my son. We came home. My wife and I were just so happy that God, we were talking, and just joy was overflowing in our conversation because we were so happy God was delivering us to this new season of life. We had made it. We had proven ourselves faithful to him. And she does this little thing. I don't know if you saw her. She's saying back here, but she's petite. She's 4'10". And she likes to do handstands when she's happy. A holdover from when she was 6, I imagine. But she went to our kitchen and did a handstand. But again, most of you know, the handstand melted into what's called a grand mal seizure. And she collapsed on the ground, and her speech was slurring as she told me to call 911. She began convulsing violently. She stopped breathing, went red, and then went blue, and then stopped moving. My kids are screaming. I'm praying and crying, and because we've never had anything like this happen before. And again, as many of you know, this launched a period of life for us in which everything that we knew, everything that I knew about being a father, about being a husband, about following God, about living life, everything my children knew, everything my wife knew, shattered. Shattered, and I at this point, a year later, we haven't gotten it back, and I don't know if we ever will. Our entire structure of life was completely and utterly gone, and it launched. We went from a year and a half of difficulty and a period in which we said, God, please deliver us. We prayed for that whole year and a half. God, please deliver us into something easier for our family. To another period of life that made that last period look like it was a breeze, look like it was a vacation. And this last year has been extremely difficult. And so many of you guys have been praying for us and calling out to us. Savannah was diagnosed with brain cancer. She has a grade 2 oligodendroglioma on the left side of her brain on her motor cortex. And we still don't know what we're going to do about that. She's on heavy, heavy medication to keep the seizures from killing her. And we are making life work right now as we cry out to God for healing over and over and over again every day for the last year. So that's where I'm at. How are you doing? So you can see why this is an important thing to me and to my family. And you can see how I am passionate about this, because this is not just something that I believe to be true intellectually, but I am walking it right now. This is not something that I'm like, I had a period of life that was tough, guys. I'm in it. This is it for me. So what I'm going to say, I really believe in. I really believe in this stuff. So God answers little prayers sometimes. He gives us the little things, and he's given me the little things in the past year. But what do we do when we have the big thing? When you've got the brain cancer, and you're following God, and you're crying out to him every single day, and you're not in rebellion or anything. We weren't running from him and he had to get our attention or something. We were following him. We packed up our 4-year-old and our 2-year-old and all of our possessions to move to missions in Texas because he called us there. Is that crazy faith? Well, it was for us, okay? Moving from a position in which we were making, those 3 jobs I was working were too many, but I was making very good money, to a missionary position in which I was making no money. By the way, if you'd like to support our mission, please support our mission. But it was crazy faith for us, okay? We stepped out into a whole new thing. It was scary, it was terrifying, and God rewards crazy faith, right? Well, what do we get? We got brain cancer. We got everything that we knew and everything we loved chopped off at the knees. And I'll tell you guys, I asked, and not calmly, many times, is this how you treat people who follow you with their entire lives, God? Is this what you do to people who lay down everything for you? This is how you reward them? Every day for a year, we've prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. God, why? We haven't abandoned him in that time. We've stayed faithful. We've followed. We've been on our knees. We've sought him. We've continued to do his will. And he has not given us an answer. I'd love to say, and 2 days ago, 1 year later, the tumor was healed, but we just had an MRI. Still there. The cancer's still there. So what do we do? What do you do when God is willing to give you the little things sometimes, but you've got the big thing? You're saying, God, please provide me a job. I'm willing to work for my family. I'm willing to put it on the line. Please give me a job. And he says nothing. What do you do when you've got the migraines that will not go away and they're making your life a living hell day in and day out, and God will not take them away? What do you do? Is crazy faith dependent on getting what you want? It's easy to answer, right? But some of you are sitting there and you're going, well, what I'm experiencing is making that pretty tough to live out. What I'm experiencing, what my family's experiencing, is making that very tough to live out every day. I came to the brink, to the absolute brink of saying, God, I believe you exist. I've spent the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours studying your word. I know you are there. But I don't think you care about me. Because if you did, you wouldn't be allowing me and my wife and my family to go through this. I came to the brink of saying, I believe you're there, but I'm really not interested in having anything to do with you. I said that at one point. And it was more than just idle words. I really meant it. So what do you do? That's the heavy part. Here we are already. You're praying for the job. You're praying for the finances. Things that matter. And you're trusting God, and you believe. You've seen him do it for other people. You've seen him answer prayers for you. God, I trust you. I believe in you. And he doesn't answer. What do you do? And I think you guys probably have a lot of similar stories where you could point at one little thing. Well, God gave me this little thing, God gave me favor in the little thing, but I've got this massive thing that it's tearing my life apart that he seems to not be so interested in. I think almost all of us probably have something. And it's not important to be comparing who has the worst, problem, because we all have things that are hard for us in our lives. I almost guarantee that all of us are sitting on something we're dealing with: depression, joblessness, marital issues, pain, illness. Why doesn't God seem to answer those things all the time? He's God. He has the power. He loves us. So why is he letting us hurt? What do you do when God seems cooperative? When you're really following God, you're really trusting in him, you're out on a limb for him, and he doesn't seem to care. What do you do? And what does crazy faith do? Most of you guys are probably familiar with the Apostle Paul, right? The Apostle Paul. If you've read the New Testament, you've read something by the Apostle Paul, probably. He's a dominant figure in the New Testament. What I'm going to do is look at one specific story from Paul's life, one account that he shares about his own experiences that through this year have not only kept my faith alive, but made it stronger than it's ever been in my life. It made my wife stronger, and as a result, it's made our marriage stronger than it's ever been, and it's made our parenting and our love for our children stronger than it's ever been, and somehow it's made my ministry stronger and more effective than it's ever been in the midst of the worst thing that could happen to our family. This account from Paul has kept us on our knees, and it's kept us walking in perspective. So I'm going to share that with you guys quickly, and I hope that it's going to minister to you all as much as it's ministered to my wife and I. And specifically, this is about having faith, and this is about praying. It's about crying out to God for something and walking in the right perspective when you do that. So I'm going to bring out 3 points that I have meditated on more times than I can tell you in the last year. And here's the first one. We need to recognize that faith in God, crying out to God, that true prayer is not just about getting what we want. It's not always about getting our way, but it's very, very often about surrendering our preferences and our desires and our will in a given situation. And that doesn't sound nice, right? In an age in which, in America, it's the prosperity gospel. It is, if you follow God, you will get blessings. If you do this for Him, He will do this for you. And honestly, without knowing it, I think I bought into that to some degree. And I at various times I said, I'm just so glad that I've been, my family, we've been following God. And God got a hold of us and we're following Him so that we don't have to experience the kind of suffering that people who are off, in sinful lifestyles and they're in self-destructive lifestyles, the kind of suffering that they experience. I really thought, if I can just stay close to God, my family and I won't have to experience that kind of suffering. Has anyone ever believed that at some level or another? If all I have to do is stay close to God and I won't suffer. And that was kind of put into jeopardy, that belief in my mind, when the closest I'd ever been to God, the farthest out on a limb I'd ever gone from Him, the worst thing that had ever happened in my life or my wife's life hit us right in the face. And not only hit us, but then day after day after day after day of crying out to Him, getting no answer. Suddenly I had to kind of reevaluate, maybe it's not just self-destructive lifestyles that brings pain. But what we need to recognize is that true prayer, true faith is not just about getting our way from God. He's not a vending machine. But very often it's about aligning our will with His will. And that, again, that kind of feels wrong to some people, but here's the thing. Jesus showed us this. Sitting in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before he was about to go to the greatest suffering of His life, the cross. He sat and He prayed to God. And Jesus Christ said, please don't make me do this. Let this cup pass from my lips, Lord. He didn't want to go through that. So is it okay to not want to have to suffer? Every single night I pray to God, please don't let us suffer. However, what did Jesus say next? But not my will, but yours. Because true prayer is about crying out to God, right? It is about having crazy faith that He will answer, but it's not just about getting your answer. But every bit as much, it is about aligning your will with a God who is bigger and smarter and more capable than you will ever be. Amen. Not my will, but yours be done. I don't want to go through this, but I trust that you have a better plan than me. And so I submit to your will. Jesus taught us how to pray. Matthew 7, the Lord's Prayer. He says, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's how to pray. You align yourself with the will of God. So true prayer is this. And Paul would figure this out. The Apostle Paul would figure this out because he experienced this stuff too. Really quick background on the Apostle Paul. Most of you are probably familiar with him, but in my opinion, if anybody deserves a real good answer to a prayer, it's Paul. If you can earn yeses to your request for prayer, I think Paul would have earned it. Guy was, early in his life, he hated Christianity when he arrived in the scene. He was self-described as a zealot among zealots among the Jewish people, a Pharisee among Pharisees. And he not only hated Christianity, some of you, might be here and maybe you're a guest from a family member, maybe you hate Christianity. But I almost guarantee you do not hate Christianity as much as Paul did, because he was literally murderous in his hatred of Christianity. He would drag Christians out of their homes and commit them to prison, and murderous, whispering threats of murder on his lips. And he hated Christianity, but as most of you guys know, he had a miraculous conversion. He encountered Jesus. He changed his life completely, and he went from being the greatest persecutor of early Christianity in the first century to the greatest missionary, certainly of the first century, but maybe in the history of the world. The guy is responsible for bringing the gospel to the majority of the known world at the time of the first century. He wrote over half of the New Testament, I think it is. Yeah, he wrote over half of the New Testament. Almost every book you'll read, if you were just to pick one randomly, it would be written by Paul. The guy, incredibly bold, incredible, crazy faith. You want to talk about crazy faith? You look at Paul, because the guy would do anything, and he was fearless, or he seemed fearless. And man, he suffered for his crazy faith. He went anywhere that God told him to. He was beaten for his faith. He was shipwrecked for his faith. At one point, he was dragged out of a city. The Jews, he riled up a crowd. The Jews were mad at him. They dragged him out of the city. They stoned him. And first century stoning is when you take a big rock and you're beaten with it by a mob until you're not moving or breathing or twitching or making noises anymore. Paul was stoned. And it said, when he seemed dead, as in they're like, he's dead, they left him and they went back into the city. And then it says he just, thankfully it was like a Princess Bride kind of situation. He was only mostly dead, and he arose and walked back into the city. But the guy went through more than we can possibly imagine. I mean, we think we know suffering. This guy went through it all. He was imprisoned. He was beaten. He was hurt. He was left for dead. He went through it all for Jesus. Crazy faith. And he saw crazy results. The guy brought hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people to Christ. He started the majority of the most massive churches in the period of the first century. Incredible faith. And he endured all that much. And if I'm God, and Paul, the Apostle Paul, comes to me and asks me for something, I'm probably going to give it to him. I'm like, well, you're my greatest servant. You've been the most faithful to me. You're responsible for maybe more of my plans being effective on the earth than maybe, almost as much as Jesus did in his time. Paul certainly saw more people come to the gospel than Jesus did. Jesus left about 120 people at the end of his 3 years. Paul is responsible for tens more than that. Not that the numbers are the end result, because Jesus created disciples that made disciples, but Paul was certainly an incredible tool in the hands of God. If I'm God, I'm thinking, okay, Paul, if you need something, you just ask me, man. You know what? I'm going to give this to you. I'm going to give you a raise. Ask whatever you want, you can have, because you've been through the ringer. But here's Paul's account. To me, for a long time, this is a very challenging portion of Scripture until I begin to experience this portion of Scripture, and then it was a comfort. But here's what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, and we're going to start in verse 7. Paul is talking. He's talking to a church that he founded some years before. And this is right near the end of Paul's last known missionary journey. And so it's nearing the end of his formal time in missions after years and years and years of doing this. And Paul says, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. Okay, so this is a little challenging, right? Because here we have an account of Satan putting something into Paul, the Apostle Paul's life. And if you think someone would be under protection from the enemy, it'd be Paul. But Satan put something into Paul's life, and apparently God allowed it. And apparently God used it to keep him from becoming conceited. And apparently it tormented him. So this isn't a minor inconvenience. You guys know what the word torment means. It is far beyond the concept of an inconvenience or a slight bother. It is great, great suffering, something that dominates your daily existence. It is tormenting him. What was the thorn in the flesh? We don't know. Scholars have debated that for about 1,500 years. There are theories all over the place. We don't know exactly what it was. We know it was tormenting him. There's a lot of guesses. Most scholars believe it was some kind of, probably like a physical ailment. Some think it was malaria. Some think it was some kind of recurring epilepsy. Some think it was poor eyesight, and cite a number of reasons for that. But whatever it was something that was in him, and it tormented him. Very likely some kind of physical illness or physical problem. He said, it was given to me. It was given to me, and God used it to keep me from becoming conceited. So how many of you guys would say that you have some form of thorn in your life right now? For me, it's my wife's brain cancer. I think we all have a thorn. And again, it's not a competition. We all have something that is tormenting us, right? Some of you, it might be a person. Some of you, it might be your boss. If it's the person sitting beside you, I would recommend not looking over or giving any sign. Some of you, it's an illness. Some of you, it is a pain or a headache. Some of you, it's a financial situation. That's extremely common in this day and age. I think most of us have something in our lives, and we're saying, God, please give relief. Please change this. Please, Lord. And God is apparently doing nothing. If it's still there, then God is apparently not doing anything. Apparently the answer is not, yes, I will change it at this moment. But we have to remember, before we go on, because there's a lot more to talk about this, we have to remember that when we pray, prayer, faith, crying out to God is not just about getting what we want, but it's very, very often about surrendering our preferences and our desires and what we think is best in the moment to the plan and the will of God. It's extremely important for us to remember. So that's going to really quickly bring us to number 2. And this is something that's been very important for me. And it's been something that's been hard for me to learn, but it's so important. Real prayer, real faith is a harsh reminder that we are not in control. But if we're actually praying consistently and we're actually walking in faith, not only does it remind us that we're not in control, but it keeps us close to the only one who is. And that's, again, so important. Because we really like to maintain the feeling of control, right? Any control freaks in here? I'm a control freak. I like to micromanage. I like to make sure everything is running A-okay, and I get very stressed and bent out of shape if it isn't. But God knows that. And here I have found myself in a situation in which not only is my wife's physical condition out of my control, but my family is out of my control, and my finances are out of my control, and my ministry to a large degree is out of my control, and every major thing in my life is suddenly outside of my ability to affect in a meaningful way. And if I'm not really careful, I will lose my mind. In a funny way, but also in a very unfunny way. We have the Evans rage gene. My father has it, his father had it, I have it, my brothers have it. The kind of thing where, I don't know if you guys can relate with this, some people just like want to scream into a pillow. I want to beat down a door. Yeah. That kind of rage gene. If I'm not very careful, I'll beat down some doors. I will lose my mind. Because God has, I won't say forced, but I will say certainly allowed my family to be in this kind of position. And if I'm not walking with this kind of perspective, reminding myself I am not in control, and whenever I feel like I am in control, I am still not in control, but God is, and I'm walking with him. We have to remember this. Here's what Paul says. The next verse over, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 8. After he talks about his thorn in his flesh, he says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. This isn't 3 times I casually implied that I'd like this taken away from me. He says, pleaded. Paul the apostle, on his knees, pleaded before the God that he had laid aside everything for, to have that thorn taken away from him. That was the level at which it tormented him. 3 times I pleaded, Lord, take it away from me. This is not like an individual times. Paul's implying that he's spent 3 major seasons of focused intercessory prayer, pleading with God to take this away from him. You guys in a season like that? I've already said it, but we're in a season like that. We haven't asked once or twice for healing. We have asked every day for 1 year and 2 days, multiple times a day, and not casually, but with tears and sometimes with fists shaking at the heavens, sometimes on our knees, sometimes fighting off the desire to disconnect and to give up. We're right now going through what Paul is describing, pleading with God to remove this. And some of you guys are in that season right now, and you're pleading with God. God, please take this illness away. Please take this sickness away. Please take the cancer away. Please take the headaches away. God, please save this relationship. God, please give me the job. God, please provide for us. God, please fix this. Please, please, please. Whatever it is, sometimes we're begging and pleading and praying, and that's exactly what Paul is doing here. And again, we got to remember, this is not some guy who is riding the fence on whether he's dedicated to God or not. This is not a guy who does his own thing, and then when things get tough, he turns around and he calls to God and asks for, expects his prayers to be answered now that he's, now I'm coming back after months and months and months of walking away from you like the prodigal son. This is Paul. He's laid everything in his life aside for God. He's pleading with God. God, I trust you. God, I've laid my life aside for you. God has done miracles through Paul. You guys know that, right? All through Acts, God did healings through Paul for other people. And now Paul's the one who needs a healing. And God apparently doesn't care. That doesn't make any sense to me, naturally. What in the world? Seems backwards, God. Why are you healing the people who don't care about you, and you're not healing the people who actually care about you? This is messed up. And this is, again, I said this before, but this is the exact debate that has raged between my wife and I and God for a year. God, we're following you. We really are following you. We're not lacking faith. God has done healings through us before. We've prayed for people and seen them healed before. We've laid aside what we want for him, but he won't give us the relief. He won't give us the healing. So what are we going to do? What is our faith going to do? And if I'm God, I'm looking at Paul, I'm saying, absolutely, man. You know what? I'm going to heal you. I'm going to give you, more years to live. I'm going to give you that raise. I'm going to give you whatever you want. You're amazing, Paul. You're my greatest servant. Of course, I will do whatever you ask for. But what does God say? I mean, you can just think in the grand scheme of things. How many prayers do you think God has answered? Billions, trillions of prayers through the years? Innumerable amounts of prayers for all kinds of people. He's used Paul to do incredible miracles over and over and over again, and surely God can help Paul out a little bit for something that is tormenting him, for something that Paul is pleading with God to help with. This is how we felt. Paul begs, and what does God say in verse 9? He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. If you didn't get chills reading that, you need to read it again. Paul, the Apostle Paul, if anyone deserves a bit of help from God, it's him. Crying out to God for healing for him again and again, pleading to God for this. And God says, Paul, for you, my grace is enough. And I need you to be powerful and effective, and my power is made perfect in your weakness. Paul's going, please, God, can you do this one thing for me? God, I could serve you more efficiently. I could serve you more effectively if you would just do this for me. Savannah and I had said that exact thing. Because on paper, it's true. The amount of time I can dedicate to my ministry is severely limited by my wife's brain cancer. The amount of time that she can dedicate to her personal ministry, to her children, severely limited by her brain cancer. And we know God wants us to be sowing into the ministry He's called us to. We know God wants us to be sowing into His ministry, into our children. We say, okay, well, you want us to do this. Can you give us healing so we can do it? We've said it so many times. And God said to us, as God said to Paul, no. This is where I've got you right now. And for right now in this time of life, my grace is enough for you. Because my power is made perfect in you in the weakness you are walking in right now. Well, the word grace is a funny word because we use it so much in Christianity, we sometimes lose the meaning. Grace, strictly speaking, means undeserved favor. And one scholar put it in a way I never forgot. He said, grace is when God freely extends Himself, leaning and reaching into us because He's disposed to bless us and disposed to be near us. And God says, Paul, my grace, my presence, my relationship with you, my walking with you, my Holy Spirit, that is enough for you. Because the weakness in your body, the handicap you're walking with right now, it's nothing to me. To you, it is torment. To me, it is the weakness by which I'm going to bring my power through you. We don't want that. Right? We want guaranteed healing. And I can't tell you how many people have messaged us with incredibly well intention saying, like if you ask enough, God will heal your wife. If you ask with enough faith, God will heal your wife. So all you have to do is build up enough faith and God will do it. We're going, what else do we have to do? We've asked at this point thousands of times. Somebody told me, you know what? If sometimes that you can ask that first time, and maybe God doesn't answer. But if you pray 2 or 3 times, God will hear you. At what point do we have to hit the number limit? And why did God imply a number limit? That doesn't make any sense to me. At what point is my faith enough? If I've laid aside what makes sense to me for my life, my career, my wife, my family, my children, at what point is my faith going to be enough for God to listen to me? And then in the face of all that is Paul, who if anybody has enough faith, it's Paul. Please don't try to convince me that the guy who established the theological doctrine of faith does not have enough faith for his healing. If he doesn't have enough faith, then none of you do, okay? I certainly don't. So what is it? Why does God let Paul sit there and say, you know what? No, I'm not going to heal you because my grace is enough for you, because my power is made perfect in your weakness. And here's the thing. We tend to say, God, this is what I need. This is what I need to happen. I need this healing, and then I can do what you want me to do. I need this job, and then I can serve you. And then I can be the father and the husband you've called me to be. And then I can do this, and then I can do this. You know what, Lord? All you have to do is fix this one thing. That is the condition for my crazy faith. That's what it is, whether we know it or not. And God says, well, take a look at my friend Paul here. I allowed him to be crippled. I allowed him to walk with torment day by day. And he is the most effective follower of Christ that has maybe ever walked this earth. because my power is made perfect in your weakness. We say, God, this is what I need. This is what I need. This is what I need. And God says, no, that's not what you need. I'm what you need. Me. My grace, my leaning in, my walking with you. I am sufficient. I'm sufficient in the face of your illness. I'm sufficient in the face of your homelessness. I'm sufficient in the face of your broken marriage. I am enough for you. It's a hard pill for us to swallow because we feel like everything should fall in line when we start doing the right things. If I follow God, the blessings will follow me. Paul is a living example of how that's not necessarily always true. But sometimes God wants us to experience the leaning in, the reaching in, where God says, I could do that. Do I intellectually believe that God could heal my wife right now? You bet I do. I've seen God do stuff like that plenty of times before. I believe it with everything within me. Am I going to believe that when I pray again for the third time later today for healing for my wife? Yes. And am I going to believe that when I pray tomorrow and the day after and the next day and the next day? Yes. But here's the big question. Is my faith in God going to be conditional upon him answering my prayer tomorrow or the next day or the next day or the next day? Is there a point in which I say, okay, God, I gave you 2 years to answer, 2 years to give me what I've been asking for? That's enough. I'm done with you. What's the condition for our faith? Because let me tell you something completely honest. If God never heals my wife, I will not live any differently than how I'm living right now. I can say that with complete and utter honesty, with total integrity before you guys right now. If he never heals her, nothing will change in my life. Nothing. You know, to some degree, I have to fight off a total and utter acceptance that this is the way life is right now, in the sense that it would be a surprise if he ever healed her. Because then my prayers aren't really effectual. I'm not really meaning them when I'm praying. It's a fine line to walk between crying out for healing and between being okay when you don't get what you're crying out for emotionally. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. But if God never heals her, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing till I'm dead. And in that respect, I don't care if he heals her or not. Does that make sense? Be careful that you heard what I said there. In that respect, in terms of the way I am living my life right now, if he never heals her, if nothing of the suffering that my family is experiencing right now ever changes, nothing will change right here. And in that respect, it doesn't matter to me whether she's healed or not. You hear that? Careful that I don't want you to misunderstand. Because it matters to me immensely whether she's healed or not, which is why I cry out to God with everything within me multiple times a day, and I will for the rest of my life until she's healed or until I'm dead. But in the respect of me following God with my life, it doesn't make a difference. Because God's power is made perfect in the weakness that he has forced us into. And so that's going to bring us very quickly to this last point. That prayer is not just asking God for something, but it is just as much about trusting God with everything. Amen. Don't get this wrong. Prayer is asking. It is. If you come to me right now and you say, I've got cancer too, you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to tell you, you know what, just trust God with the outcome. Now, you should, but at the same time, God is a responsive God. He is a living God who responds to our requests. You guys believe that? So if you come and tell me I've got some horrible illness, I'm going to say, let's pray right now that God will heal it. But if God doesn't heal it, is my faith in him going to be shaken or broken? Am I going to stop living for him the way I've been living for him? Don't get confused. This is not just a like, you know what, God does everything, his will only, I never make requests, I never ask him to change anything. I believe that God is responsive. You see that in the Bible with Hezekiah, with Moses, over and over and over again. People crying out to God and God reaching down and responding to their requests. God told Hezekiah, hey, you're going to die. Get your stuff together. Hezekiah hit his knees and cried out to God, and God said, okay, Isaiah, turn back around and tell him he's got longer to live. I think God responds to our requests. But at the same time, if he doesn't, where's my crazy faith? Because prayer is not just about asking God. It is, but it's also about trusting him with everything. Jesus said, Lord, let this cup pass from my lips, as in the same way that I have prayed for a year and 2 days, exactly. God, let this cup pass from my family's lips. But within the same breath as Jesus said it, but you know what? I submit to your plan. I want you to change it. If you can change it, please change it. But ultimately, I submit to you because I trust you with my life. And that's the difference. And here Paul is, years later, and I think this is so incredibly profound. Years later, looking back at this thorn, which he almost certainly still has, with a very, very different perspective. This thing that tormented him, incredible pain, incredible suffering, as he cried out to God again and again and again for healing, as we begin to wrap up today. Let's put up the slide again. He says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And Paul says this, Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest in me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses. I delight in insults. I delight in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. Why? Because when I am weak, then I am strong. Now, that is very counter-human logic, isn't it? Here's a question. Does Paul delight in the experience of weakness? Does Paul delight in the experience of insult and hardship and persecution and difficulty? Does he? It's not a trick question. He doesn't. Okay? I don't think there's anybody that really delights in suffering. But what is Paul delighting in then? I cried out to God for healing, and God said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, for that reason, I delight in the sufferings that I am allowed to go through in the service of my God, because in the weakness that he brings me to, he brings out power. Let me tell you guys something really honest. I have never in my life been a better husband than I am right now. Not even close. You can ask my wife that. You can also ask my wife about this one. I have never in my life been a better father to my children, my 4-year-old and my 2-year-old, than I am right now. And paradoxically, despite only being able to work about half as many hours a day towards my ministry as I would without this cancer in the picture, paradoxically, I have never been even remotely as effective in my service to God as I am right now. I'm seeing incredible yield. I'm seeing incredible effects. I'm seeing doors that I have bashed my head against for years suddenly flinging open. Why? Because God's grace is sufficient for me, and he is making his power complete in me, in my weakness. And I'm seeing effectiveness and meaningfulness and strength in my life that I have never before seen anything like, until God gave us this to deal with. And I'm not going to say God gave Savannah this cancer, but he's certainly allowing it by virtue of the fact that we've asked him thousands of times to take it away, and he hasn't said yes yet. But at the same time, as all these other things, I've never been closer to God, and I've never had crazier faith than I have right now. Not even close. Because his power is made perfect in my weakness. Is weakness automatically power? No. Are experiencing hardships and sufferings and difficulties and persecutions, is that automatically a good thing? No. But is it good when you allow God in the picture, the God who is faithful to do incredibly good things with incredibly bad things? Is that good? You guys think God is capable to turn the worst thing into the best thing? You think God is faithful to turn brain cancer and something that should break a family to pieces into something that turns the family into a more loving unit and a more effective unit than it's ever been before? You think God can do that? I am evidence that God can do that. And many of you are evidence that God can use horrible things to do incredible things. My wife and I, sitting in the ICU for 2 weeks after she was diagnosed with this cancer, as we were trying to figure out, is there a, what do we do next? How do we live now? My wife sitting in there as we were in internal turmoil, but we were crying out to God, and we were trying to find peace and walk with joy in the ICU. If you've ever been in the ICU, there's not a lot of peace or joy in there. And we interacted with the nurses, and one day, one of the nurses came to my wife in tears and said, "What is with you and your husband? I work in here all the time. There's nothing but depression and sadness in this room. And you guys, you've just been diagnosed with brain cancer. And you're smiling and you're happy and you're kind. You and your husband. What is with you guys?" So you guys, we have seen walls that we would have never had any opportunity to help God bring down, coming down before us because we are being faithful in what He's given us. And, at one point we felt like God said to us, "If I didn't think that you could handle this, I would take it away right now. But I am trusting you with this suffering and this weakness because I want to create something in you that is greater than you will ever be on your own. I want to use you to do things that you could never do on your own. Will you be faithful to me? Will you have that kind of faith?" And our answer, blessedly so far, has been yes. And I pray that it remains yes for the rest of my life, whether God heals my wife or not. And I pray that it's that way for you guys as well. It's a fine line to walk between crying out to God for that answer every day and trusting Him. Not trusting in the answer, but trusting in Him, the person, the living God, while you cry out for that answer. It's a fine line to walk, but it's the right line. It's the only right line. So as the band comes up and we begin to wrap this, I'm going to pray. But Father, you never said that life would be easy. You never promised us a life free from suffering or hardship. I know you don't enjoy letting us suffer, but I also know that some things are worth suffering for. God, I can't say with confidence why you've allowed my wife to continue with this cancer, but I know you've done things in our life and things in other people's lives that we've encountered. And God, for me, I say with full confidence, thank you for this year. I'm not thankful for the experience, God, but I'm so thankful for your goodness and your faithfulness to make something good of what we've experienced. I'm not thankful for the cancer, but I'm thankful for what you are growing from the cancer. The house you tore down for us, God, you're building something stronger and something better. And Father, I pray that would be the case for every single one of us. Whatever the thorn in our lives is, God, that we would continue crying out to you for an answer. But we would remember, God, that true prayer and true faith is not just getting what we want, but it's about aligning our will with yours. That true prayer is not about being in control of our lives or our future, but it's about reminding ourselves that you're the only one who is that. And that prayer is not just asking you for something, but it's trusting you with everything, God. Would you remind us of that? Would you help us to align ourselves with you in such a way that you can turn that thorn, turn that weakness, that insult, the suffering, the persecution, the hardship, you would turn those things into something better. And that your power would be made perfect in our weakness. We love you, God. Amen.